Did you get that permission?
Recording.
Okay, perfect. All right. Thanks, Maxwell and Todd, coming from Revelry today. They're going to talk to us about a lot of questions that Maxwell gets asked in his job every day, he said, that are pretty consistent in terms of building apps and building software solutions. So Maxwell, I'm just going to turn it over to you, let you give some introduction and background, and kick off 10, 12 minutes of presentation, then we'll jump into Q&A after that.
Cool. Hey everyone, good morning. My name is Maxwell Walters, new to Salt Lake by way of New Orleans after 7 years. Currently working for a company, Revelry, which is the core of where my expertise is driven from. Today's deck is really just, some hot takes on what you should be thinking about if you're approaching building software from the lens of someone who is having those conversations on a regular basis with potential partners. Y'all can see my screen being shared. Thumbs up from Taylor. Cool. See if I know how to use my machine. There we go. So first, who am I? I've been moving around the country for the past 30 years and somehow found my way to Utah. After being below sea level, it just made sense to go as high above sea level as possible. And there's so much in the American West that I haven't explored. So really excited to be here and be doing that. Graduated college, joined Venture for America. I found my way to Revelry and participate with Day One, 3 organizations, entrepreneurially related, and kind of drive a lot of the exposure and insight I have into building products. And I'm a dog father, and if you want to help me make my dog famous, even though she's 5 now, you can go ahead and follow her handle. But other than that, let's get into it. So what are we talking about? We're talking about the before, during, and after of what it means to build software. Before, the things you should be considering and thinking about as you're employing teams or thinking of finding teams. During, what you should be looking for how they build, what they talk about, the process that they follow. And after, so that you're fully aware of the cost center that you are creating by approaching building software. So when we get into the before, right, it's really about the what, the how, the why, and the how. And the what is objectives and problems. So where did your organization, where can it improve? What you need to accomplish, whether that's internal or external. The more you can nail that down, the more clarity you have of what needs to be built. This is less so like, hey, I want this fantasy idea, and more like, how can I impact my business? And so when I talk to people, I want to see them deploy software to drive impact. I don't want to see them build fanciful things without validation or insights. And so by understanding the objectives and problems, you're able to then walk around the edges of who has this problem, what is their makeup, why do they have it, why does it exist, what is the importance of it, and really get into some important information that helps de-risk any effort you make moving forward. The metrics piece is, how are you going to measure success? If ROI is important and you're building software to drive impact, then you need to know what metric you're moving. And this is really important because you don't need to go build something super complex to move a metric. It actually can be moved very simply in most cases, and sometimes without even deploying software in the first place. So those are definitely ways to begin to de-risk. And then along those lines, do you need technology? Can you do analog? Oftentimes people ask me to build something. I start with, have you considered doing that in an analog fashion to either prove out the idea or help inform what actually the software needs to be and contain? Really comes down to, when you're looking at deploying software, an initial decision tree is this build versus buy equation. If you're building, you're deploying a team and you're establishing a cost center. No short way to think about that other than this is going to live beyond the actual build. If you're buying, you're looking at the market. If you need a CRM, you have Salesforce, you have Pipedrive, you have so many options. Why do you need to build a CRM? If you need a CMS, why do you need to build one? If you can use WordPress, if you can use Wix, if you can use these other things. And then the combo plate is actually what ends up happening in most situations, where there are specific parts of functionality that need to be created custom, but majority of the app or the functionality can be pulled from existing partners. And so a framing that I always like to put out there is, Are you looking for a product on a shelf, or are you looking for a team to help you put a product on a shelf? If it's a product on a shelf, you're in the buy mentality. If you're looking for a team, you're in that build mentality. So when we think about deciding to build, right, we've moved past the buy. It's pretty simple. If it's out there, use it. And maybe that even is the best place to start because it helps inform what you need to build. But after you decided to build, again, one thing I like to emphasize is you're adding a cost center that will not go away. And what I mean by that is when you roll your car off the lot, you then still have to maintain and keep it up and running. And there's no difference with software. Things degrade, things break, things don't last. And so that cost center is going to be maintained. What are your constraints? Are you prepared to hire a person? Are you prepared to bring on a full-time salary, overhead, et cetera? Or do you only have a certain amount of money to move a metric? The more that you can have that information up front, you can call it a budget, the more informed your conversations with resources like Revelry will be, because then they can understand, okay, within this box, here's the problem, and here's how we have to go approach and solve that because of this larger constraint. So it's really important force factor. The skateboard versus the Ferrari analogy is a lot of people show up thinking they want the nicest, most polished thing to accomplish a simple task. But if going from A to B can be done on a skateboard, let's always start there, because the amount of information that we can learn, the amount of insights we can gain from that skateboard are invaluable compared to building the Ferrari from scratch. Prioritization being key is recognizing that, sure, you may want all these bells and whistles, but if they're not all attacking those core metrics, then they may not need to be built immediately. They can wait to start to see traction on the other metrics before you go into those features that are lower priority. Another important concept here is the core loop. This is the utility of your application. What is that straight, direct path someone takes from logging in to getting the utility and to logging off? If you think of it another way, why are they opening your app or your software in the first place? This is a super important piece because, if we look at Uber, you look at Airbnb, they do a thing. Uber helps you. I need a ride. I pick a destination. I find a ride. I get the ride. I'm done. You can do a lot more. There's now food. There's now driver selection. There's now car selection. All of that are additional features that came after. Airbnb, you want to find a place, book it, and then be able to show up and get into the house. Sure, there's a ton of other functionality in there, but again, those core loops are direct. Start with the core loop, have that drive the impact you're looking for, and then consider the additional functionality that will support and make that more robust. And then the short-term versus the long-term thinking is, am I attacking this metric for today and this month and this quarter, or am I thinking about this metric's growth and changing and evolving over the next couple years? If you're going short-term, you're most likely going to build things that end up getting thrown away because they're not built for that long-term focus. But if you build longer-term, it's obviously going to take longer to get the thing off the ground. The internal versus external debate when you approach building a thing is that second order decision tree after you decided to build. If you're going to go internal, you're hiring a team, your overhead and recruiting costs are real, insurance, liability, whatever you need to pay employees, right? And it's going to take time to ramp up. So I decide today I need to do something. I still may be 3 to 4 months away from seeing any meaningful progress because that person needs to be found, onboarded, and et cetera. Externally, you should have the mentality of, I've decided not to hire internally, so I'm looking for something that represents what I would expect from an internal hire from an external team. And you really can go the high end, the BCGs, Accentures of the world, the middle end, which is Revelry, Infuse, a company my buddy works at, or ThoughtBot, a pretty well-known agency, or the low end, which is this company like Rural Sourcing or Offshore Teams, and they all come with their trade-offs. But one thing to consider is communication, and one thing to consider with these external teams is greater flexibility and resourcing, because you are not hiring a specific person with a set of expertise that is limited into their brain. In most cases with these organizations that you're outsourcing, you get the collective brain power helping on your project. And so those are definitely things worth considering in that realm. Also, I know I speak fast, so feel free to interrupt me. And also, I'm totally available for follow-ups. I just really want to do a high-level covering of things. So if we move into during how software comes together, right? It's the build is happening. And what should you be looking for when your team is building, or what should you expect them to tell you about what the build is like before you engage? Do they have a process? Do they have a cadence for work? Is there something that is clear on here's how the idea goes from words to a ticket to actually being worked to resulting
get food for us and the kids.
in an output? Did I hear something from somebody? Maybe a hot mic? Okay, keep it rolling. Transparency. How much can you see? If they're your employees, you could see everything. But if they're this external partner, are they trying to hide things from you? Are they working behind a curtain? Are they thinking you're not technical enough to involve you in conversations or insights? In our case, we like you to be in the driver's seat. In most cases, that product owner role is pivotal, and they're going to ask you to play it in an effective way, which is participating and understanding. The reason this is important as a product owner is that if you build something and you don't know what you had built, that's a problem. You should be just as familiar as the devs with what got built, because it ultimately adds value to your organization, whether either you have to sell it externally or internally, but regardless, you need to be aware of what's happening. And then tooling. The hammer and nails comment here is, if you expected me to build your house, would you provide me the hammer and nails? No, you would expect me to show up with them to execute. And so a lot of shops will, again, depending on their transparency, show you all the things they use and how they are able to build on top of those. The thing with tooling that I like to differentiate the middle and high end versus the low end is that if you're establishing a software organization within your team, they're going to have robust tooling to keep that train on the tracks, for lack of a better analogy. And if you don't see that represented in the team you hire, then there's some credibility or loss of confidence in their ability to deliver something that's going to be stable and maintained and supportable moving forward. That's the wrong button. There we go. And so this is a little bit in the weeds, but I wanted to bring this up as what a process could look like. And so on this screen is a linear representation of a non-linear process of going from idea to creating something. So when you think about features in your application, those are what we would call, we get broken down into what are called user stories. Those user stories reflect the specific work that team members need to do. So if we think about a login flow, every application needs a login flow. But if you told someone to build a login flow, I could ask you 40 questions about what that login flow is supposed to be. Am I able to reset my password? Am I able to sign in with Facebook? Am I able to use Apple authentication? All those questions inform that piece of functionality, but also determine its long tail complexity. So the more clarity you can take what is a feature and break it down into what are its components, those then become the user stories that people can work. So when your engineers or designers pick up this work, they're not asking additional questions about what needs to happen. They're sitting there, they know what needs to happen, and they're executing. The approvals and planning poker piece, right? You should be on the front end having awareness of what the team you're working with is doing, period. And that comes in the approval process. Now, they all look different and feel different in terms of each team, but at some point before they start to execute, you should be understanding what they're going to go forth and do. The poker is an estimation exercise, so helping you understand what they're going to go forth and do. They assign scores to each ticket so that you can unpack that complexity in a more visual sense, but also, again, letting the technical people guide maybe a non-technical or technical product owner through the development. Kickoffs and sprint commitments are about making claims of what's going to happen in a given week. It's about being transparent and upfront with the work that has been approved and scored. In progress and review are things that I'll hit on in the next slide, and then delivery, measuring, and improving. Revelry works in week-long sprints. Some people work in 2-week-long sprints. Some people work in 4 to 6-week-long sprints. Whatever that is, within that sprint, things should be accomplished. And from your perspective as a product owner, you should start to see the house come together. When the stairs are in, you should be the first to walk on them. When the windows are in, you should be the first to open them, etc. we think about like taking those user stories and actually seeing the work happen. This is a good visualization of that. Is you've approved the work, it's ready to happen, and then it's in progress. And when it's in progress, you're hoping the team is doing stand-ups to let you know how they're proceeding through through the work, and you hope they're leaving comments. The comments are an important piece, because if they're going to leave after they've built it, you want some legacy of their decision making, so that when other people step in to solve problems or fix things, that becomes information that you have at your fingertips. And then delivery is around execution. Quality checks are around making sure what gets produced is legitimate and of highest quality. And so some companies will have automated tooling. Some people will do peer review, meaning someone looks over someone else's work. Then there's the quality assurance of actually testing the functionality. And then there's the final piece, which is UAT, user authorized testing, or stakeholder review, which is where you, the product owner, are giving your final sign off. So you approve on the front end and you approve on the back end. This again helps keep you in the driver's seat as you approach building a technology with an outsourced team. Then that's only the beginning, or a significant part of the experience, but there's still more to come. And now that the train has left the station, ending on a few different thoughts here. Bugs, enhancements, technical debt, third-party dependencies, they're real. They're not going to go away. You're going to have somebody around to fix them, maintain them, and support them. If you think applications or technology gets built and it's going to last forever, unfortunately, the modern web and the modern way applications are built, that's not the case. If you ever, a simple example of this is if you go to your phone right now, I do this almost on a daily basis. I have at least 20 applications that want me to update them. Why is that happening? It's because those teams found things that they wanted to improve, change, enhance, and rather than making me go completely re-download the application through the Apple Store, they're able to make those updates. But those updates are happening because there's continued investment in those technologies. When you roll your car off the lot, hopefully you have a mechanic on speed dial. Similar idea here. If you're not thinking about the end of your project in terms of who's going to support and maintain what was built before or during, then you're going to be rushing to figure that out at the end, and that's never a good place to be. So do you have the internal team to assume responsibility for what's being created? Will you retain the external team to operate in a support or maintenance capacity? And then if we go beyond the actual application degrading and changing and needing to be updated, what do users think? Do you have a way for processing feedback? Do you have a way for analyzing that feedback and implementing it into the application? Regardless of how many users you talk to before or during your build, you're still going to find spaces where this thing can be improved. This thing can drive more impact. This thing can drive more ROI. Are you prepared to answer those questions, or do you expect that when you approach building software, it's gonna be over when you're done building it? And then, if we go back to the enhancements piece, it's okay, we're meeting our metrics, but what's the next metric? Is this software an internal piece of software that we solved one department's problems, but we still have 5 more departments to go to? Or is this a piece of software that we solved one customer need, but there's still 5 other customer needs that are not being solved? And when you focus on ROI, you're not going to build that a robust application first. You're going to build those chunks that make an impact. And so if you're taking that approach, you have to consider, how do we then expand the robustness of this, which goes back to the where I started with, you're establishing a cost center. Lastly, how can I help? I do this conversation regularly. I am a strategic thought partner for people who want to consider building software. I don't approach those conversations trying to sell my services. I approach those conversations with the mindset of, if I am successful in helping you de-risk your efforts, then I'm successful at my job. And if it plays out for my team, that works. And in this world of software, there are so many options and it's so saturated that unless you have a solid relationship with the team you're going into, into anything with, you're potentially making space for heartache or pain going down the road. I can't tell you how many horror stories I've heard of, hey, we went with this team because they sounded so good, but then it became a nightmare experience, from communication, billing issues, transparency, expectation setting, you name it, process, collaboration, communication, all preventing or creating shitty experiences, for lack of a better word. So if I can be useful, please don't hesitate and get in front of me. Hopefully I can steer you in the right direction, or at least throw some interesting ideas on the table. That is everything in a nutshell that I wanted to share. Again, I know I blew through it, so I'm happy to take the rest of the time for questions, or also follow up individually as relevant and appropriate.
Maxwell, thank you. That was awesome. Love the slides. Are you willing to share the slides with everybody here?
Yeah, there's like no detail on them, but you saw what you got. But yeah, I'm happy to send them out.
Okay, that's awesome. If you can send them to me, I'll distribute them to the team. But I selfishly put some questions in the chat. And if anybody else has questions, you can either unmute yourself or throw them in the chat. But we've got, probably, if everybody's okay, typically we'll go until about 11:45 or 50. But if you can stay, Maxwell, and answer questions until noon, we can sign off then, but would love to open it up to discussion and questions now.
Yeah, and Taylor, I'll start with yours. Top metrics for software developed for customer facing versus internal facing. Great question. It depends is an answer that comes out of my mouth more often than not. But let's start with internal facing software. If you're building software for your team, you want them to be more efficient. You want to reduce the time it takes them to accomplish a task that's associated with delivering your product or service. So when I see internal facing software, I think of efficiency metrics. Are they getting their jobs done easier because of technology? If you're implementing technology and it makes their jobs harder, you forgot to ask them how they do their job, or you decided not to understand actually what goes into their job and didn't involve them in the application making process. Solid example here is one of our partners came to us saying that they were paying drivers too much in overtime. And it turned out that their dispatch system was pen and paper, Excel sheets, and a war room full of Mountain Dew, dip, and TVs. We started with taking away the spreadsheets, cell phones, and Excel and bringing a dispatching application to life, which drove impact against that drivers being stranded because they didn't know where to go, which reduced overtime, which led to a multi-year investment in a more robust logistical suite, but started there. The customer-facing side, daily active users. How many people are completing the core loop that I mentioned? Are they driving value in using your product or service? Those are some ways to think about that. Rule of thumb on FTE should be allocated to a software to ensure it is successfully used after implementation. Interesting question. I would say it's less about how many should be allocated after and more about how many are allocated during the build, because in that build process, you want to understand what your users are looking for to the nth degree, so that when you are completed, you have a higher level of confidence that it will be used in the way that you think and want it based on user feedback. However, if you have a simple core loop that is completed in a certain amount of weeks, and it's not going to have many enhancements coming right down the pipeline, you may not need any FTEs to support it. You may just need that mechanic on speed dial in case something goes wrong in more of a service level type agreement. If you're looking at building something in a 4-month span and you know you're going to want to add to it over the next 8 months, you should think of that build in a 12-month mindset. And the 4-month part is just a milestone that you're getting to. So if you have that 2 FTE allocation for 12 months, then you have 8 months of enhancements, updates, and features that are coming to the initial milestone versus thinking of them as separate projects. Pete, what do you think about using roll your own tools, no code for initial development? Does this lead to problems in migrating to a more robust solution as the needs grow? This is a hot debate internally. I don't have the answer other than I think you should do what you need to do as your business and constraints allow, right? If you're well capitalized and you want experts to handle this for you, go forth and pay them, because it's you can focus on other areas of your business. If you're a scrappy entrepreneur and you want to get traction, you want to prove metrics, you want to prove progress, no code is a legitimate, viable tool. Now, depending on your platform of your choice, scalability will become an issue, but most no code that I see is used in that validation phase as another method to get something in front of people quickly that actually has some functionality behind it, which leads to more robust insights. Traditionally, this was done through mockups and Figmas or sketches or Adobe files, wireframes and that such. Now you can do it with no-code tools. The trade-off, again, is if you invest in a no-code tool that has its limitations, then you got to think short-term, because in that long-term, you're going to need to evolve out of it. If you're thinking of an entrepreneur on a cap raise, right, when you're starting in those early seed rounds, you may not need robust platforming. But when you go raise that significant amount of money, that's when you then consider the expense of rebuilding what you've already had to support the scale or reach that you're trying to get to.
Maxwell, I've got another question. On one of your slides, you talked about when you engage a team that's going to build a thing for you, they need to have process, transparency, and tooling. So my question is kind of like, if I go to Shane at Mindfire Technologies to build my software, because he's awesome, shameless plug. If I go in there, if I go into him, what should my process in terms of vetting him or a shop to say, okay, what processes, transparency and tooling do you have? Like, how should that interaction go? What are the first few questions I should be asking him?
Yeah. I will give you a biased answer because it's my experience here. If Shane's willing to show you existing current projects and how they're running and what they're doing, I think that's the best insight you're going to get. When I walk through people through who we are, I have no fear in pulling up existing projects and saying, hey, everything I talked through that deck, this is what it exactly looks like. And so you're really just trying to get a sense of how his team works. Is he presenting that they have a system for working? Is he presenting that they are constantly communicating in a public setting, like Slack channels, for instance, so that you can review the conversations? Where if you wanted to be a helicopter mom, you could, or helicopter dad, you could sit there and watch the whole channel and watch the work happen. That's kind of how I think about it. Is are they selling you because are they hard selling you, or are they literally saying, here's my books, they're open, ask away. And I want to hit on that. It's mostly and will always be about the relationship you as the product owner or leader have with your representative on the other side, and potentially the leadership of that company as well. If you don't feel right, it's a relationship, and you should not enter it without that feeling of confidence. Also, referrals or previous customers. Like, sure, they're biased from the result that they had, and if it was a great one, they're going to present a great story. But you can really start to understand by specific questions to those folks how that experience unfolded. Was it always, cookies and cupcakes, or was there some pain and arguments along the way? How did those get resolved? The more interested I think you are in what that company does or how they're prepared or how they deal with things when they go wrong, the more insights I think you'll have when it comes to helping validate the choices you're making.
That's helpful. Thanks. Maybe a follow-up quick question to that is, as a customer, when I walk into a shop, what should I expect to get from the shop without paying? How much should they walk through and try and understand on their own dime what I'm trying to build versus me paying them to scope out my project?
Great question. How big is the shop you're going to? The bigger ones will have full teams dedicated to this loss leader effort to walk you to the nth degree of what is going to happen. The lower end teams may ask for, you to provide documentation. They may give you a bunch of questions to answer and ask you to help them understand what they're thinking in order to come back. We are a shop that doesn't give you a a statement of work that tells you, how long something will take or how much it's going to cost, because the variability within delivery is immense. So if they're willing to understand your business, show some documentation of how they understand your business, help you model out workflows, model out core loops for things that you're looking to impact, right? Then they're in a position of helping you make a more informed decision. In my case, I'll spend as much time as you want if it feels like it's mutually beneficial. If I'm helping you make a better decision, whether with Revelry or not, then that puts you in a more informed position to make a better decision, which means you're going to be more successful, which means that whether or not we work together, you're going to accomplish something worth it. And that's what's important. So when you talk about free work, part of this presentation and part of these early discussions are, how prepared are you? Because you shouldn't really need much work to be done with the more preparation that you've come in. If you're looking for shops to tell you what you need and then shop and compare those against each other, that's a very different mentality than saying, I've done my research, I know what metrics I have, I know what problems I'm solving, I'm open to your expertise and how to solve them. And that's really what you're getting with a team, is you're getting expertise you don't have when it comes to solving your problems. If you're looking for a very specific thing, then those are the shops that are going to tell you exactly what you want to hear and tell you exactly how much it's going to cost and how long it's going to take. And then 3 weeks in, send you a change order because they were wrong. So that's how I think of that. Tyler, you jumped in with the aspect of process tracking for the purpose of having documented approaches for future developer. Really resonated with me. Are there methods of process tracking that tend to be common or preferred among developers? Tyler, could you give me Tyler Gibbs, could you give me a little bit more color on that?
Yeah, absolutely. I guess you had a slide that just talked about, that transparency and making sure that the developers are documenting things in a way that would help, if future team members, or whether it's in-house or not, kind of get an idea of the logic behind what was being developed and kind of the approach that they were taking. And so I'm just curious, I don't want to go in and asking developers, hey, do this thing because it works for me, but might not work at all for a developer, right? So I'm just wondering if there's preferred ways that they tend to have, or processes or softwares that they tend to use.
Yeah, so it's less about the tooling and more about the process of documentation. So in software, there's a few different levels of documentation. There's documentation in the code itself of like, hey, this is a description of what this function is supposed to do. So if you're up in here trying to change it, read this quickly before you break something. Then there is the documentation of how they approach problem solving. And so if in our case, we use GitHub as our repository, and each issue is a standalone page. And if that issue has background, and then some other additional information about what needs to be accomplished, we write them in these statements that are given, when, then. So given I want to log in, given I'm a user, when I want to log in, I can use Apple. So in that issue, right, underneath it is that conversation that unfolds of, hey, here's how I'm thinking about solving this problem. Here's the tool I'm going to use. Here's the approach I'm going to take. Very much in line with when we were kids and showing our work in a math problem. So it's less about like, hey, is this actually work for a developer? And more about the process with which they develop things and the expectation their team has. And so when you go back to tooling and process as like what you're looking for in an organization, is, are they aware of the life of your organization and that this is going to have to go beyond their work? If so, then documentation is going to be a part of what they do because it's necessary for the future. Even if they're the only developers that ever touch it, if I solve a problem and then Priscilla comes back and tries to fix what I broke or something that I did, and she can't get into my thinking, then she's spending more time, which means more money for the client, trying to fix that thing. And so for us, documentation is a culture. And when it comes to asking that of developers, right, that's a thing to look for is that culture of helping others understand how they're doing the work a part of that thing? If so, that's a good sign versus like, oh, how do I figure out how to pull this information out of developers? Does that help? You said awesome, cool. Tyler, how do you define UAT? What should someone who is new to software development expect during this process? Fantastic question. And this is something that the non-technical product owners are, this and other things are very scared of. And so user authorized testing is essentially, hey, we've looked at this. We think it matches what we spoke. You proved it on the front end. We built it. We tested it internally. We think it matches exactly what you were expecting. Does it match what you were expecting? And so when I mentioned earlier of when I build the stairs, I want you to walk them. When I build the windows, I want you to open them. For us, UAT is exactly that. It's using the application to complete the task that was supposed to be accomplished by the building team. If you can do that task, then you've successfully completed the UAT of that, and you can move on to the next one. Sometimes non-technical product owners like for a bunch of things to be UAT'd at once because they're not familiar with a fragmented application experience. Totally acceptable, really up to the team and the product owner to kind of work out the right cadence for them. But whoever you find as a technical partner, if you've admitted you're not technical, you've put the onus on them to make sure that they bring you up to speed around each piece of their puzzle or each piece of their process. And so everyone will have a different QA, UAT process. Not everyone will ask you to give a final sign off. They'll wait for a demo and then in that demo, collect all your feedback. For us, we do each little piece on its own and avoid those larger demos because that's time spent that we could have gotten that feedback 5 days ago and already made and implemented changes that reflect that feedback versus waiting for all these things to come into a more formal demo process, which is really kind of the agile methodology and mentality. Because I just mentioned agile, I will also mention that waterfall is another common way that people build applications. That's much more heavy on the front end of really defining what's happening, which we don't do because we've seen that those definitions always fall apart in our experience. And so we are an agile shop, which is understand what needs to be built, build it, test it, validate it, confirm it, move to the next thing, move to the next thing, move to the next thing. I hope that helped, Tyler. Cool. We have 3 minutes. If you would like 2 minutes and 30 seconds back in your day, we can take no more questions or someone can fit one in here in the last couple seconds, but max@revelry.co is my email. For some reason, we didn't get the M, but we're .co. And again, I'm in Salt Lake, so I look forward to meeting you all here that are local and some of you have connected with and hung out with already. So just super grateful to Taylor and this community and for welcoming me here. And hopefully I can help and add value to what y'all are doing along the way.
Show us your dog.
Oh man, you guys. Olive, do you want to get off the couch? No.
Because I'm getting this. This is what I'm picking up next in a few weeks. Golden Retriever. Oh, there we go. Golden Retriever puppy right there.
In all her glory. 80 pounds, Louisiana mutt.
Nice.
And if it wasn't for better dog walks, I may never have found my way to Utah.
Love it.
Come to the Northwest. It's beautiful up here.
The Northwest, Brian, you're in the Northwest?
In Battleground, Washington.
Okay. I was at a friend of mine's house recently, and they had a map that had concentric circles of all the places that are within reach of Utah. And everything seems to be 5 hours or less than 10 hours, which from New Orleans, that was pretty much the drive you had to make to get anywhere. So I'm so excited. And Brian, hold your tongue. You might see me at the coffee shop down the street.
See you there.
Maxwell, thanks so much. This was awesome. It's inspiring to listen to someone who is an amazing expert in their field. So thank you.
Yeah, really happy to do it, y'all, and excited to be a part of this community. So we'll see next week. It looks like some really cool things are happening. So I guess I'll have to spend a whole day with y'all.
Awesome. Thanks, Maxwell.